Hello, and welcome to today's webinar titled Evidence Generation for JCAs: How Can AI Boost Efficiency and Maintain Quality? Brought to you and sponsored by Open Health. Before we begin, I'd like to remind you of a few housekeeping items. All attendees have joined in listen-only mode. We encourage you to use the chat feature to network and connect with other attendees. Please submit your questions to the speakers using the Q&A feature. Our speakers are looking forward to answering your questions after the presentation has completed. This webinar is also using polling, and we encourage your participation in these polls. The webinar is being recorded and will be sent via email to all registered attendees and made available for on-demand viewing on the ISPOR webinar series webpage in approximately 2 business days. Additionally, please take a moment to review our antitrust compliance statement. It is now my pleasure to invite the moderator, Grace Fox, to begin today's webinar.
Hi, everyone. My name is Grace Fox, and I'm an Associate Director in Strategic Market Access at Open Health, the sponsor of this webinar. And I'd like to thank you for attending this webinar and welcome you to our discussion. As we proceed, as Ryan mentioned, please leave your questions in the comments, and we'll do our best to address them at the end. So this is just a brief agenda. Again, welcome to the webinar. I'll be introducing our speakers for today, giving some brief background and learning objectives, and then we'll have presentations by panelists that will present an academic perspective, an industry perspective, consulting perspective. We'll have some questions and then some next steps. So again, my name is Grace. I'll be moderating our webinar today. I'm an Associate Director in Strategic Market Access at Open Health, and my focus is primarily on evidence synthesis, pricing and reimbursement, and value communications. And I have expertise in developing and implementing novel methods for HEOR, including the use of AI for SLRs and TLRs. I would like to introduce our panelists, beginning with Farad. Farad is an evidence synthesis manager at the Infectious Diseases Data Observatory at the University of Oxford. With 20 years of experience in the field of evidence synthesis, he's led teams from 5 continents and delivered a diverse range of evidence synthesis projects, including systematic reviews, scoping reviews, network meta-analyses, evidence and gap maps, clinical practice guidelines, clinical evaluation reports, and HTAs to a diverse range of organizations like WHO, the UN, FDA, NHS, and many others. Representing an industry perspective, we have Suzanne, who is a trained economist specializing in HTA with a 20-year career in academia, consulting, and industry. And she is currently a director in the International Value and Access team with Eli Lilly and Company and leads evidence generation for global HTA submissions and affiliate market access for the immunology portfolio. And finally, representing a consulting perspective, I want to introduce Emanuele, who is a scientific office lead for the Strategic Market Access Group at Open Health. And in his role, he guides thought leadership and scientific innovation activities for the market access team. He's very engaged in European HTA and access policy, digital health policy, and AI policy. And he's offered publications on the EU HTA, digital health policies, and AI in healthcare. He's also a member of the Italian Society of Artificial Intelligence and Medicine, and here he conducts mapping and policy activities on the use of AI in medicine in Italy. So thank you for joining today's speakers, and looking forward to your presentations in a few moments. So I want to provide some brief background on EU HCAR and some opportunities and challenges for European stakeholders. So the EU HCAR is a framework for horizon scanning and JCA in the EU, and it's aimed at several components. First, reducing the burden on the industry and EU member states, increasing the quality of HTA and evidence-based decision-making. And according to the regulation, the JCA will review the analyses within the PICOS framework, but JCA must be inclusive, meaning that all member states' needs must be accounted for via survey, but will be converted into as few PICOs as possible. So it's currently unclear how optimization of PICOs will take place to ensure the most meaningful impact across the EU while capturing all individual member states' requirements. In terms of evidence generation for JCAs, there's potential to integrate AI and SLRs, which are a cornerstone of the HTA process, but the launch of the EU JCA may further increase the resources required for SLR production, which we all know is labor and resource intensive. There's a potential to improve efficiency and accuracy. AI models, particularly those using machine learning or natural language processing, can assist in automating these labor-intensive stages, including screening and selection, data extraction, and synthesis. Up until this point, most HTA agencies have not released guidance specifically on the use of AI for SLRs. But NICE recently released a position statement, and I've included here a few quotes from their paper. The first being, any use of AI methods should be based upon the principle of augmenting, not replacing human reviewers. They also mentioned that machine learning methods and large language model prompts may be used to support evidence identification in terms of search strategies, classifying studies, and literature screening in both title abstract or primary and full text screening, and finally visualization of search results. They also mentioned that these large language models could potentially be used to automate data extraction. And then finally, when AI is used, it would be important to explain the choice of the methodologies that were used in the SLR and report how they were used, including the amount of human input. So these are early insights on appropriate use of artificial intelligence for SLRs from NICE. And as we all know, this is an area of intense debate and a lot of innovation. So I'm excited to now have Farad. Or sorry, we'll have an audience survey before then. I'm ready to introduce Farad. Before we move into our first speaker, I want to ask a poll, which is please answer this, according to your perspective. What timeline do you believe is most feasible for validating and standardizing the use of AI for SLRs for HTA purposes? Do you believe that these can be validated and standardized within the next year, within the next 2 to 3 years, within the next 4 to 5 years, or perhaps you're unsure? Please go ahead and vote. I think we'll give folks a few more seconds to vote, and then we'll take a look at the results. Okay, great. I hope everyone can see the results. It seems that around 57% of folks feel that this may take place within the next 2 to 3 years. 22% said within the next 4 to 5 years. 14% said within the next year, and about 9% of folks are unsure. And I think that's totally fair. This perhaps is a good question for us to pose to our panelists today as well. So I don't see the option for me to advance the slide. Ryan, do you mind to check on that? Perfect. So our learning objectives today, just to summarize for you all, we're exploring how AI can support evidence generation for JCAs and consider the potential benefits and the challenges. Specifically, we'll address a few key questions, and then the others that come from the audience First, how can AI tools increase the efficiency of SLRs for JCAs while maintaining quality, which we know is important to all of us? What are the possible challenges and barriers to implementing AI for SLRs? What will it take for HTA agencies to accept AI-supported SLRs? And what steps can be taken to ensure that appropriate, reliable, and transparent use of AI is being completed for preparing SLRs within the JCA context? So now I'll pass it off to Farad for a perspective that comes from academia.
Thank you, Grace. So hello, everyone. My name is Farhad, and my time is spread across these 4 organizations that you can see here. I will be looking at the existing research. But before that, I want to start with a slide on typology of artificial intelligence, because based on my previous experience, it causes a lot of confusion. So we have different classifications for the AI. So we have one classification that says that we have 2 categories of artificial intelligence: the AI that learns, and we know it mainly as the machine learning. Machine learning is a way to achieve artificial intelligence, and we have a rule-based. Example of machine learning-based AI is when we are screening titles and abstract in the systematic review tools, that it learns from our decisions. And the example of rule-based AI is, for example, spam detectors in your inbox. So that is one classification. The second classification is discriminative AI versus generative AI. It is important to know these classes, because then you know when to go to which one of these categories, depending on your purpose. So discriminative AI, what it does is to look at the data that you provided and then classifies them based on certain characteristics. So it finds the borders between the classes of data in your data set. Generative AI generates content that could be text, image, video. And then we have another classification called supervised AI that learns from the human. So human is the teacher, it teaches the machine, machine is the student, learns. And then based on that learning, we could provide more tasks, more data, and ask the machine to implement the learning into that new data. We also have supervised learning, unsupervised learning, where we present the machine with a lot of information without giving any other information and any other instruction. And the machine is supposed to learn from this data and find, let's say, patterns or trends within that data set. So what is surprising is that we have had artificial intelligence, supervised one, discriminative one, in evidence synthesis for over 15 years. So it is not new. We've been using it for 15 years. It is just the last 5 years that by introduction of large language models that are unsupervised and they are generative AI, that people started making noises that this is great and we are going to do a lot of great stuff with this. But the generative AI and the large language models that are being used by chatbots are suitable, and it has been instructed in their terms and conditions that they are good for generating text, translation, summarization, and question answering. So getting back to the research, so based on this background of classes of AI, we have research done on using large language models and discriminative AI as well to find the PICO questions for the clinical practice guidelines and then prioritize them. So it is useful that we could use AI for finding the PICO questions, which is useful for both clinical practice guidelines and JCA purposes. But for the search part of the evidence synthesis, the majority of the tools that are around are good for scoping, for scanning, and not horizon scanning. Recommending the papers. So if you tell the AI that this paper is relevant, it can recommend 5 more relevant papers. And mapping the existing literature. They are not very good at designing systematic search strategies. It's good for collecting the keywords. It's good for writing basic Boolean string that has and or, but it cannot decide which one of the search components or blocks should be included or excluded from the search, which ones are search resistant concepts. So we don't include entire ecos into search. It cannot decide it, but it could save time by providing the structure. And then it is very good. AI is very good in automating the update searches. The reason is that from the basic search, the base search or first search that you've done, the machine can learn a lot when you are screening. And when the update search comes in automatically, it can actually classify the records to relevant or irrelevant. It is very useful when you are doing a living evidence synthesis or living systematic review, or a systematic review that requires multiple update searches. For the screening part, we've had supervised screening and priority screening since 2020. Prisma 2020 actually mentions it. So we've been using discriminative AI for screening the records. But large language models, using them for title and abstract screening, is not better than what we already had. And for obvious reasons, but large language models are good for generating stuff, not discriminating stuff. Obviously, you can teach, you can give instructions to large language models, a lot of instructions. And if you could have a very clean data set input and very clear instructions and very clear output description, then it could be helpful as the second reviewer. But generally, if you don't do all of this, it's good for scoping. So you could upload a file of 2000 records and ask for the most relevant records on certain topic, and it will give you that a few papers. So it's not as good as discriminative AI that we already have. For the full text screening, we have high hopes because large language models, if they could access the full text of the paper, they will have enough information to decide if a paper is relevant or not. So it could be a good game changing if the existing systematic review tools implement large language models or embed large language models in the systems. For assessing risk of bias, it is challenging because it requires human judgment. We used to have robot reviewer, which is not publicly available right now, that assesses the risk of bias. And in 4 domains, it is as good as human, but not in all the domains. And it was just used for the risk of bias tool version 1 that was produced by Cochrane, not the version 2. We also can use large language models for risk of bias assessment. I'm aware of some of the existing programs, systematic review programs in the market that have implemented large language models for assessment of risk of bias, but it requires double checking by humans and human supervision. For data extraction, again, we have very good research papers around that show that they are working very good, 80%, 90% good, but there are missing data, there are miscalculations that require human check. The most recent research that I posted on LinkedIn yesterday was that we could actually use 2 large language models as 2 reviewers. So reviewer number 1 is GPT, reviewer number 2 is Cloudy, and then they could check each other's disagreement as well, and the human supervises them. For meta-analysis, they can be used, but the existing automation programs, data, let's say R, all of them are really efficient. We don't actually need to use AI for meta-analysis or network meta-analysis, but it is possible to use AI for conducting the analysis. And for grade, as I mentioned, for the risk of bias domain, it is almost good, but for the indirectness, inconsistency, and publication biases, it is not yet. And it may take a long time until it reaches that level. But what you need to know for using large language models, for using AI, the first lesson is don't jump onto ChatGPT for everything. There are really good, efficient tools specifically designed for scoping searches, specifically designed for assessment of risk of bias using large language models. So go for these specific tools and the specific large language models as well, rather than going for GPT and cloud for everything. So that is the first lesson. And it's going to take time for people to learn it, but that is true. And it is going to be true for the rest of the ecosystem as well. Just because research shows that it works, it doesn't mean that it's going to work for you. The research is working because the people who've done that research, they have got AI expertise, method expertise, evidence synthesis expertise. There are 5-10 people coming around to do that research. If you've got that 5-10 people, then you could reproduce that results. The second thing is that research has taken months to be conducted. And if you want AI to do everything in a day or week, it's not going to work. So what you see in research is ideal. It is not reality. And finally, tech develops. So the GPT that you used 3 months ago is different from today. So it might get actually worse, because there are research showing that large language models, as they get larger and new versions come, in some aspects, they get actually worse, not better. And the most important tip is prompt engineering. If you don't know how to instruct the large language models to do the work for you, don't expect a miracle. Look at these large language models as intern, student, or research assistant that comes to your office, has no idea about the project. You need to explain by detail. The good thing is that if you had a research assistant, they will come back to you to say that I don't know this. I couldn't find this. Many large language models wouldn't do that. They are know-it-all. I mean, if there is no answer, they will still give you an answer. So very careful when you are using them. And you need to know typology of prompts, when to use what prompt. And there are classifications of prompt. And there aren't any good books. I've got one in front of me, and it is not good. The best guide for the prompts right now are the articles that people are publishing on medium.com, which are mainly the engineers, and I find them useful. But we don't have any guide. People need to learn. Another important thing for all the AI classes, garbage in, garbage out. The quality of output you are getting is dependent on the quality of your input. And input here is not just the file that you are uploading. It is also your expertise that is instructing the machine or teaching the machine, and then instructing the machine what output you want. If you are not expert, if the quality of file that you're uploading is not good, if the search results are clinical trial registry records, if they don't have abstract, if they are not in English, do not expect a miracle. So the quality of the input is very important. And then do not trust the systems until you do your tests, and always check and double check. Start with no trust. And that is the policy that we have to implement and adopt for every user of any of the machines. There are some guidance. I think Grace mentioned the first one, and the second one is developing. Version 4.9 is available on Open Science Framework. Please do read them. And remember that humanities, law, and ethics are 2 decades behind science and tech. And that is from my experience. It is not evidence-based. It's going to take time until people realize that, actually, am I allowed to upload this copyrighted abstract or copyrighted PDF onto large language models? Is it ethical to use AI, considering the environmental impact that it has? And is it actually ethical to use it and not report it? So consider all of this. Sorry for providing a lot of information in short time. If you're interested for a deeper dive, there's going to be more opportunities to learn about using AI in evidence synthesis. And I will post some of them on our channel, youtube.com/@systematicreview. Now I'm passing it to Suzanne so we could hear about industry perspective. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fahad. So my name is Susanne. I am happy to present the industry perspective. So after all this very useful information and snapshot of where we are with the technology, what is the status quo for us as project leads for the evidence generation at the industry, and what are the additional challenges we face in light of JCA? So generating evidence for HTA submissions from the industry side, we need to follow international HTA methodology guidance. And we know that these SLR projects are really time-consuming and labor-intensive, which Grace had already mentioned earlier as well. So in order to meet HTA submission timelines, we need to carefully plan these projects, and there's fairly limited flexibility throughout the process. Now with JCA, that introduces an additional degree of uncertainty, because we're not able to anticipate all possible PICO iterations that may come up. And since they come up in a very short time frame, we will only have limited possibility to turn around and integrate that. So this will present quite a significant challenge. So in that light, a degree of automatization of the process, or at least some augmentation of some of the process steps, could be quite invaluable to give us this necessary flexibility that we may need. So stepping back a moment and think about where we are with AI and HTA from an industry standpoint, I think generally we embrace the use of innovations such as AI, where it can help us to speed up patient access to beneficial new technologies. So that pretty much goes without saying. However, and I think this links back to what Fahad has just explained, that the methodology is still fairly new to many of us. It requires learning. It requires a lot of effort. So from our perspective, we need to think about this and proceed with precautions and really make sure that we are still able to provide good quality evidence. So if you look at company internal guidelines, AI generally should be guided by ethical principles, and its use should be validated and monitored to make sure that we enable trust in AI systems and in the output we generate. So if we now think of HTA in particular, I think we need to be circumspect and responsible for using these technologies, and a lot will depend on the acceptance and any guardrails and guidance put in place by HTA agencies and our stakeholders. So this has also just come up in terms of what we see as examples and as guidance from such stakeholders at the moment. So there are some applications being published, and these case studies on AI generating or replicating SLRs and NMIs that have been done by human researchers previously do look quite promising for now. But then if you look at stakeholder guidance like the NICE documentation that we've just seen, they still express concerns about the appropriateness, transparency, and trustworthiness of AI. And in addition to what Fahad has just detailed very usefully, it looks like there is still quite a lot of effort needed, first to learn this, to familiarize ourselves with it, to be sure that we use the right tools at the right time and in the right way. But in addition, thinking of the short time window we have to provide updated evidence in terms of the JCA process, a lot of effort still seems to be needed to document all these different aspects that go with this technology. And there might be a trade-off on what's feasible and what's practicable. But then also in line with Fahad, I think as the technology matures and evolves, the use and the confidence and the acceptability will increase as well. So thank you very much. And it's my pleasure now to hand over to Emanuele.
Thank you, Susanne, and thank you, Farhad, for the great presentation. It's great to be here virtually presenting. So now I will give the consultancy perspective. We'll put a bit more light on the connection between AI and UHTA in practical terms and what we're currently seeing. But let's start from a bit more detail on the implication, just to bring everybody on board. I guess most of you at this point know about the UHTA regulation, but it's good always to recap. So the PICOs is the main challenge, as Grace has highlighted. And once the member states and the several stakeholders involved in the UHTA process will provide their inputs on the PICOs, those will be consolidated at European level. However, indeed, multiple PICOs are expected, given the large variety of actors and differences, most importantly across European healthcare systems involved. I guess you have all seen simulations ranging from 5 to 20 PICOs, also depends on who does the simulation, but definitely we do expect a large number of PICOs for the UHTA process. These impacts timelines, also because the UHTA timelines, I will see later in the slides, run in parallel to the market access, to the EMA process, and aim to anticipate, right, some of the access at the European level. Primarily, the key part is the 100 days between when the HTA coordination group will provide the final PICO list to the developers and the deadline for submission, which is anchored to the EMA, to the CHMP opinion and the EMA timelines. Therefore, this poses exceptional challenges in managing SLRs and ATCs, especially the updates, as we will see later in the slides. AI, then, it seems, with all the characteristics that Farhad and Susanne have mentioned, seems almost essential, to manage such a large body of evidence in such a short time frame. Indeed, planning your SLR and JCA with AI support, this is an idea of how it could look like. Definitely, the AI can support from the very early phases, and as Farhad has mentioned, in the scoping phase, especially the PICO scoping, it can be a support to immediately identify the evidence and guide the clinical development. This can be for your access team connecting with your clinical development team and so on and so forth. Then Every 6 months, we suggest, once the first SLR has been run, thinking about a large SLR that accounts for all the possible picos, every 6 months we will run an update. And here the AI can speed up time and save resources for an efficient update, including conference presentations, including, we know the challenges of each SLR update done every 6 months. But most importantly, then at the 3 months before final JCA submission, here is where we see the most critical point for AI to be used for literature screening, data extraction, data analysis support, and we'll dive deeper into that, the ITC part, and then of course dossier preparation. Indeed, this is our focus for the following slides, and in my opinion, that's also the area, the focus where the challenge is also in terms of implementation and policy uptake. Also for the previous SLR updates, you would need to, let the HTA authority know about the use of AI, and it can be a resource-saving tool. However, in this 3 months window, it's, in our opinion, very difficult to conduct and run efficiently both the SLR updates and the ITC without the support of AI tools. Just to give it and put it in perspective, sorry for the very busy slide, but it is a very busy and complicated regulation, as you know. What we see here is the UHTA process at the bottom, anchored and running in parallel to the EMA process. And in our opinion, already the JSC, so the Joint Scientific Consultation activity, could be seen as a window of opportunity already to discuss AI use on top of, the picoscoping and on top of all the characteristics that you want to discuss during your JSC. However, most importantly, one of the key elements will be, as I said, the picoscoping phase, which will take roughly 120 days for the coordination group and member states to provide input from the PICO. And AI will be particularly critical in this window to indeed support with SLR and dossier development. So it's just to put it into a different perspective into this slide, how AI can be implemented and can be used in the UHTA process. Now, if we go into this 100 days window, so the 3 months, let's put an example that your PICO prediction, as also Suzanne has mentioned, is not completely accurate. And here we take the example of just 2 small errors that you can do in a very small PICO exercise of 3. We expect already, as I said, much more. But let's say your comparator that you anticipated for PICO 1 actually is not fits better fits and is suggested for PICO 2, or that there is just an additional subroute that you might have not taken account of for PICO 3. Well, that means in your 3 months SLR update, you need to definitely first and foremost update the protocol to include subgroup, but then reclassify all the evidence based on the new PICO. So all your previous updates, all your previous SLRs that you've done, you will need to reclassify evidence to fit from PICO 1 to PICO 2, and then also rescreen all articles for this additional subgroup. So all your previous articles for this given subgroup. On top of this, you have to run your 3 months update. What does it mean? It means that in these 3 months, it becomes, as I said, quite essential to have a tool, discriminative tool that has been trained on your previous updates that can easily support you with reclassification, and of course also managing the SLR updates. In our view, also, this will be then essential to inform the ITC, meaning you will have enough time then to work on the critical part of the ITC details, the clinical validations and the assumptions, the engagement that you need for your ITC. And will feed also in what we see as another critical point, which is not here, is the ITC automatization. In the sense of, we see, a clear, and also as Farhad has alluded, a clear distinction that needs to be made between what is AI, so what is artificial intelligence, and what is just automation, such as dashboards data analysis and data visualization tools. AI can supplement and support SLRs, but as also Farhad has mentioned, ITC, indirect treatment comparisons, we don't see an extensive added value at the moment for AI to support on that, but definitely can feed into, you know, all those dashboards and automatization process that you can work with for your ITC. Well, of course, you know, primarily, this is what you see in this slide is what we are currently doing at Open Health for AI in evidence synthesis and across our market access practice and across ITC. So we divided our work across 4 different teams. One is testing different AI tools. We have already presented previously at some conferences like HTI this year, but also eSport last year, and we will be presenting at eSport this year and at HTI hopefully next year on the different tools that are out there that Farhad alluded to some of them, and their functionality and usefulness for SLRs. Then we have a working team working on AI between SLRs and ITC that, you know, distinction between what is artificial intelligence and what is automatization and how the 2 elements communicate, particularly looking at this time frame of the 3 months. And this is in relation to our AI and HTA regulation working group, where we try to, you know, contextualize such a innovative process that the UHTA regulation forces upon us with the use of AI. And finally, the AI use and perceptions, which is maybe the most critical point in this context, because looking at the slides that I was presenting just a little bit before, there are some AI tools that, in our opinion, can be used without the validation of, you know, HTA authorities. For example, if you just need to do scoping exercise or even the support for that extraction, it might not be needed that, you know, to have HTA authority revision and support on that. But for the SLR updates, the screening support and the revision, as NICE statement stresses, there is a strong you know, kind of approval and regulatory oversight that needs to be taken into account. And that's exactly what we aim to do there. And I will focus a bit more in the following slide, and I will also, you know, invite you to come to us at eSport to discuss this more in detail. So we are running a survey on the perception of AI in systematic literature review for health technology assessment. Here you have a QR code that you can scan and provide your inputs as well. And what we've done so far, we have collected 12 responses with 7 different HTA agencies. And indeed, what we see as some preliminary results I'm giving you here is some low level of familiarity with AI in SLR across all the agencies. Everybody stated that, you know, the level of familiarity has been judged as, you know, very low across all organizations. And they see as the most benefit the increased efficiency, not so much quality, not so much, but the increased efficiency, especially for article selection and updates and data extraction, see as the greatest added value. Very interestingly, and as NICE stated, there is a strong focus on using AI as an assistant, not replacing a human. So very likely, you know, double revision with AI support, not you know, substituting human, one human reviewer and one AI reviewer. And this is seen as the most appropriate option. And I think what is the most interesting aspect is as well the preference for AI tools validated by HTA authorities, in the sense that, you know, when you submit your dossier and you claim you have used AI and you have used AI for your SLR, well, ideally HTA agencies would like to see it as would like to see only the tools that they have validated to be used for SLR. And now that raises the question of the timelines, how much time it requires for the different agencies to validate a tool, the discrepancies between HTA agencies in tools validation. So this might be, you know, it's not definitive an answer that, you know, gives us the direction that in the future every HTA authority will have its own saying, but it gives a feeling and a flavor that there is some regulatory oversight that, you know, is taking place, and the feeling that HTA authorities might want to suggest which AI tool to use and which not to use. And as I said, we will be presenting at ISPOR, and I invite you to join there. But please also fill in the questionnaire, because the more data we get from a broad variety of stakeholders, the more we're able to, inform you and the general audience about the field. And with that, I stop here and I give the floor back to you, Grace.
Wonderful. Thank you, Emanuele. I'll invite the rest of our speakers to come on camera. We'll move forward to a question and answer time. So we have a few that we'll be going through, but please, audience members, ask your questions. We'll be happy to address those as we can. And just a reminder that this is being recorded. You'll be able to view it after the fact as well. And I think each of the members of our webinar today will be at ISPOR EU. So we'll be excited to meet you all in person at that time. So our first question I'll direct to Farad. Farad, what are the necessary steps required to ensure that AI use is transparent and accountable? What does that look like from your perspective?
Very hard question, because AI changes. Even the descriptive AI, because they are using active learning, they are actively changing, and there is a black box component to the rating or classification they are providing. So as long as we acknowledge that we have used AI, what system, what version, and what date, and how we use this, so the others could use and repeat our experience, I think it is transparent enough. And the fact that we need at least one person to double check whatever is done and not trusting AI solely because of the output that it has presented. I think that is the part that is very important, and sticking to the existing guidelines, reading and following the existing reporting, conducting guidelines for use of AI, even though they are right now very limited.
Wonderful, thank you. Suzanne, a question for you, and I think you hinted at this in your presentation. What are the risks of misusing AI in the context of JCAs? We've talked about these benefits, but what are the potential downsides for misuse or lack of transparent reporting?
Yeah, I think the main risk from where I'm standing personally would be a lack of acceptance, because the work we do obviously aims at getting through the process with minimal pushback, or with submitting good quality evidence that stakeholders have trust in. So we probably want to avoid using AI tools or similar tools haphazardly, or not following good practice, such as Farad just outlined, and basically casting doubt over the evidence that we submit. So I think there needs to be sufficient familiarity. We need to be confident that we know that what we're doing, that we have the sufficient skills and sufficient knowledge of the application to make sure that the evidence we submit still meets the required standards.
Awesome, thank you. Emanuele, a question for you. How can we validate the use of AI for screening and extraction, for example? And from the survey that we've mentioned here, what role should external validation play, and who would be those stakeholders that would be involved in validating AI?
Yeah, no, thanks for the question. I think that's a $1 million question. For the first part, well, the way we are doing it is comparing the results of traditional SLRs, so double reviewer. We have SLRs that we've conducted across several years that we're testing against AI platforms, and the approach we're taking is a agnostic platform agnostic, in the sense that we test against all different platforms, mostly, as Farad has alluded to, discriminative AI tools, and we just look at accuracy, the sensitivity, and the saving in terms of working time. Our unit of measures is FTEs at the moment, but the idea is how efficient and how good it is. What are the challenges for each of them in terms of missing some relevant studies, but also what are the implication in terms of larger number of inclusions between title abstracts and full text. So all these will inform, in our opinion, using the right tool for the right step, and addressing whether it's valuable to use AI in each case. Because as Farhad has alluded to, it's not only using the platform and that's it. You need to have a team of people that know how to use it. You need to adapt it to your need, and that requires time as well. It's a different skill set. So we have a lot of AI, but behind it is a lot of automation and integration of different profiles, which we take into account, and that's the way we are using it. Now, with regards to the external validation, well, external validation, in the way we see it from this survey, is that HTA authorities, or the public represented by HTA authorities, will need to have a say on which tool to be used. Now, I'm a bit skeptical about the competencies within HTA authorities about AI and new methodologies. Therefore, even in our survey, similar to the results we see here, we see a window of 2 to 3 years mentioned by the responders as the window, where AI will be implemented across SLRs for HTA. However, I think that requires much more training, much more understanding. So I'm a bit skeptical, unless we connect the dots. I mean, unless we contextualize HTA with the broader healthcare system, automatization and broader digitalization of healthcare system. And in such regards, at a European level, for example, AI Act and the regulation around digital tools could be, complemented with the HTA regulation, but this at the moment is not happening. So there is not a connection between what's happening in the AI world and what's happening in the HTA world, especially at a European level. And in my opinion, these two worlds could be connected to speed up, because we have an AI Act at the European level which addresses some of the challenges, which provides some clearance and guidance on acceptabilities of AI tools. However, it's not contextualized, it's not adapted, it's not shaped around HTA. I hope that answers a bit the question.
Yeah, that's helpful. And we've had another question come in, Emanuele. I'll just throw it back to you because it's so related to what you were just mentioning. And I know you and I have gone through this exercise together. How can folks, calculate time, resource savings, time FTEs with the use of AI technologies and SLRs? What does that math look like?
Yeah, well, I that's a very interesting aspect. So as I was saying earlier, when you implement AI, we see a difference between the different tools in terms of screening results. We see a high level of accuracy, meaning that it overall includes every study that was included also by the 2 human reviewers. But often we see also larger studies being included. What it means at, for example, title full text stage or title abstract stage as well. So what it means is that you do identify the same study you had identified with both human reviewers, the accuracy is high, but you have also a larger body of evidence being included across both steps for some of the tools. So that means that in case your humans need to spend more time evaluating the tools, and we calculate just the days, number of hours, the estimates based on our internal exercise on how much time we spend to screen title abstract in 1 hour and in 1 day, therefore in 1 day, and how much time we spend screening full text. Then there is the big difference between SLRs that have more structured inputs, like only coming from RCTs, that generally are over the last years are reported in a clearer and more structured manner and way, and as compared to SLRs that include observational studies where we see a big heterogeneity in terms of reporting, in terms of data inputs. So we try to take into account that as well. But as you said, you're also leading on that. So if you have some elements, additional elements that I might have forgotten, please feel free to jump in.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. I have nothing else to add, Emanuele. I think that was great, and it summarized a lot of conversations that we've had internally, and I know with Suzanne and Farhad as well. Farhad, I have a question for you, kind of changing our focus a bit from time savings, perhaps, to other aspects of using AI for these activities. An audience member has asked, to what extent would focusing on AI tools like Pico prediction on human expert curated hyper-relevant document or data set versus a large language model on general internet on the general internet address question. So kind of asking, what about if we have HUR specific models versus those that are general? I know you have thoughts, and yeah, I'm excited to hear what those may be.
Yes. Thank you, Grace. And Gavin, that is a very good question. And I must say that is a question that should many who are working in HTA and clinical practice guidelines should ask. So I'm gonna mention 3 points in answer to your question. The first one is that if we focus on expert-generated content and identifying PICOs, we will be considering mainly the expert's point of view. And we may ignore the public, many non-expert people that are out there. So it is at some point is great that we have this expert panel and expert-generated and curated content to ask large language models to create PICOs based on which. But also there are people on Twitter, people on Instagram that are talking about their problem, their healthcare problems, and they will be missed unless we use the general large language models like GPT. So that is one part. The second part is that there might be experts out of our panel that may have futuristic views or the views that we may have missed in our panel. They may have PICO questions that it will be missed if we focus. And then the third point is about being the futuristic. Obviously, experts have read the literature, they have human brain, they could see what's going to happen in the next 5, 10, 20 years. AI can't. And the reason that AI is not good for predicting the future is that it has been trained based on the past and present. So if they see any content that is relevant to the past and present, they would present it to you. But they will have no idea what's going to happen in the next 5, 10 years. And even if they see something new, let's say there is a new medication coming, Zibrax, but it has never seen it, so it will not pick it up. So they are not good for the futuristic questions. So what will be needed in the community, in the patient community in the next 10 years. So it's a mixed, let's say, feelings in using one of them or 2 of them. And it depends on your resources as well. If you don't have any resources, I would say expert curated one is the one to go. But if you have resources, why not use the general AI beside the expert curated large language models? Then both of them will work.
Awesome. Thank you, Farad. That's helpful. And my approach to science, just kind of zooming out and getting philosophical, is, craft an important research question and then use appropriate methodologies instead of being technology driven. And folks have, we can all, that's probably a webinar for another time. What's your approach, to the scientific process? But, I feel it's often best to match the tools that we're using, and those evolve over time to important research questions. But we'll go down that path perhaps together at another time. Suzanne, I have a question for you, which is, how can we implement or safeguard ourselves from over-relying on AI in these processes? Or is it possible to over-rely on AI at this point?
That is an interesting consideration. Probably that's a question for in a few years when the technology is much more widespread. At the moment, I would rather err on the side of caution and approach this carefully and just complement it with current use. So right now, from where I'm standing, I couldn't really see an over-reliance, but maybe in a few years' time, this is the completely new normal. I still remember a time where we didn't have mobile phones, and it was deemed completely unnecessary, or we didn't really see the point because nobody had one. Whereas now I don't think I know anybody who doesn't have a mobile phone. So I can well imagine that in a few years' time, that's exactly where we are with AI, and it's all matured. It's well established. We all know how to handle it. There is enough guidance and regulation around it to make it reliable, trustworthy, and fit for purpose. And then probably there's no issue with over-relying on it. I can well imagine a time where we say, can you still imagine so and so many years ago, we used to do all this work by hand. So maybe that is the hopeful future. But for now, I would still be careful and just use it circumspectly.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. That makes sense. Emanuele, I have a question for you, which is, one that we've discussed a lot over time, which is this space is, becoming crowded with different AI-based tools. How can we, measure reliability, accuracy across tools? What does that look like from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question, and let me zoom out a bit in, what we see in the here and access space. I think we mostly see different trends. So either consultants in trying to develop their own tool, collaborating with some and implementing it in a very, I would say, business-oriented fashion, or like trying to adapt a model to some specific, company models and company requirements, or different tools being developed and then SLR providers or industry itself trying these different tools. I think the best way is, and at least that's the approach we take, is to test the different ones. And testing doesn't mean only testing the tool itself, but test also the team that is behind the tool, because as you know, Grace, and as the rest of the panel knows very well, behind AI there is always a lot of humans, and the collaboration, the ability you have to collaborate with the team behind an AI model is the most important part, to adapt it to the different needs and to adapt it to the different requirements across time. So I would say test it, do your exercise and publish them so that the body of evidence becomes larger. The more you test with the different SLRs that you have conducted, especially including different study designs, the more we have information about accuracy, reproducibility, and stick to the same outcomes definition, because otherwise everybody does something different. And secondly, also have a more qualitative understanding of the provider of the AI tool, so that you can complement your expertise with the one with the expertise from the AI provider. I would say these two are the critical elements. At least that's what we are doing.
Excellent. And I see we are coming close to time. So let me ask one more question, and then we'll perhaps summarize and then point you to the recording in the future. Farad, you've just answered a question in the chat around how to get up to speed and moving from screening and selection to data extraction. So there's so much for folks to take in, whether they're kind of early on in understanding how to use these. Some people are far down the road on the edge of testing. What are kind of your go-to resources for getting up to speed in this area? I know you've listed some throughout this webinar, but could you perhaps just give us a summary of where you go and where you suggest others to go to for getting familiar with this topic and then doing their own testing in the future?
Of course. So that is the challenge with today's work. So we used to, in old days, you used to learn one skill and live with it for 30 years, work, and then retire. Now we have our own job, and then there are new stuff coming up, and we have to learn on top of what we were doing. And this is one of those occasions that we have to spend time and learn about these technologies. The best place right now to go is the published peer-reviewed research. Read them, critically read them. Don't just accept whatever they are saying, and then do your own research. As I mentioned, zero trust. And then what happens is that many of the currently published research are reporting the prompts they have used to land on that accuracy sensitivity number that they are reporting. So instead of reinventing the wheel, you could just start from the prompts that have been published in these research papers. There are some on randomized control trials, some of them are non-randomized control trials. And then you could start from there. If there isn't any, then you could do the trial and error and learn how you could instruct large language models to do it for you. But if you are not sure about using them, if you are not confident, the best way would be to go for the tools that have already done the prompt engineering for you. The tools that have already implemented, they are for systematic review specifically, and they already have implemented large language models in them. For example, PicoPortal has recently implemented risk of bias assessment tools, not one, multiple tools. That is extremely time saving when people are doing risk of bias assessment for RCTs, non-RCTs. And then what it does, it gets the answer for you, it gets the section highlighted, so you could check and make the final decision. But it saves you the time for browsing, scrolling, finding, copying, and pasting, which is a lot of time. So go for the specific tools when you can.
Wonderful, thank you. And I think that's a great way to end our webinar today. We're at our time. So let me thank our panelists, Farad, Suzanne, Emanuele, our sponsor, Open Health, and our host, ISPOR, for this webinar. And thanks to all of you for joining us today and for the really insightful questions. This is just the beginning of a long conversation that will evolve over time. And as Suzanne said, maybe in 2 to 3 years, we use AI, as often as I check my cell phone, which is more than I would like to admit to you all on a public webinar. But we look forward to staying in touch. Please do drop by our poster at ISPOR. As I mentioned, we'll all be there. And the recording will be available over the next few days, so you can come back to it. So a huge thanks from us again, and wish you all a great rest of the day.
Thank you.
Please join me in thanking our speakers for sharing their time and expertise today, and additional thank you to our attendees for participating in this webinar. The full-length recording, as Grace mentioned, will be available for on-demand viewing via email to all registered attendees, made available for on-demand viewing via email and are on the ISPOR webinar series webpage in approximately 2 business days. Thank you again for joining today's webinar.